This video reviews the best-selling book Rich Dad Poor Dad, pointing out that the contents of the book, while theoretically correct, are easily misinterpreted and misused. The author of the video argues that the get-rich-quick route advocated in the book, e.g. investing directly, is not suitable for most people, and that a more realistic path would be to move from being an employee to being self-employed, to being an entrepreneur, and finally to being an investor. The video emphasizes the importance of practice and action, advising viewers not to be misled by the success stories in the book, but to research and plan for their own situation, and then combine that with learning to solve real problems, rather than blindly copying the methods in the book.
All right, so today we're doing something a little different for our deep dive.
A little different.
Yeah, I mean, usually we're sifting through a stack of articles or reports.
Right, yeah, right.
But this time, this time we're tackling a YouTube video essay.
Oh, interesting. A video essay, huh?
Yep, and there's a bit of a twist. It's in Chinese.
Okay, so we're going international this time.
We are, but the ideas in this video, they're universal.
I see.
Especially if you're at all interested in personal finance. That whole world.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Big topic these days.
Huge. And get this, the video, it actually takes aim at a book you've probably heard of.
Oh, really? What book?
Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Ah, a classic. Everyone talks about that one.
I know, right? And the title of this video essay, well, let's just say it doesn't hold back.
Lay it on me. What's it called?
Okay, ready. Rich Dad, Poor Dad will actually make you poorer. It won't make you rich. Don't be fooled, the poor. Don't get rich by reading books. What you really need to do is this.
Wow, okay, that's quite the statement.
Right. I mean, they're basically saying this super popular personal finance book could be leading people astray.
Yeah, that's definitely a bold claim. So we're diving into a video that's like a full-on critique of Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Exactly. It breaks down why this book, while it does have some good points, might not be the be-all, end-all guide to wealth that some people think it is.
I'm already intrigued. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's make sure everyone's on the same page.
Good idea.
For folks who haven't read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, how would you sum up the book's main message? Like, what's the core idea?
Okay, so Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it basically encourages you to shift your mindset.
Shift your mindset how?
To stop thinking like an employee and start thinking more like a business owner or an investor.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty common theme in those kinds of books.
Right, and it really emphasizes building assets, things that generate income.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it stresses minimizing liabilities, things that drain your bank account. You know the drill.
Yeah, sounds familiar. So where does this video essay come in? Why is it calling out the book like this?
Well, the video essayist argues that a lot of readers, they kind of misinterpret the advice. Or oversimplify it.
I can see that happening.
Right, and that can lead people to make like risky financial decisions without fully understanding what they're getting into.
Makes sense. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of getting rich quick without really grasping all the work and the risks involved.
Totally.
Yeah.
So the video essay, it really hones in on two big issues with Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The first one is what it calls the wrong order of operations.
Wrong order of operations, huh? Okay, I'm curious.
So the book stresses acquiring assets, right?
Right.
But the video essayist argues that it makes it seem like you should jump straight into investing even if you don't have a strong financial foundation yet.
So it's like putting the cart before the horse.
Exactly.
You can't invest if you don't have any capital to work with.
Right. And to illustrate this point, the video essay, it even shares this story about the essayist's friend.
Oh, a friend of theirs.
Yeah, this friend works in the securities industry.
Okay.
So they're dealing with this stuff all the time.
Right.
And this friend observed that even seasoned financial professionals, they rarely become full-time investors.
Really?
Because it's just that hard.
Huh. That's a pretty sobering thought for anyone who thinks, they can just read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and become a Wall Street guru overnight.
Right. So the video essay proposes a more gradual and I think a more achievable route.
What's that?
It's kind of a step-by-step thing.
Okay.
You start as an employee.
Okay.
Then you transition to being self-employed.
Got it.
Then you become a business owner.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, if you choose, you become an investor.
I see. So instead of diving headfirst into the world of investing, this approach is about building a solid foundation first.
Yeah, exactly. Building your skills, building your income before you take on those bigger risks.
Makes a lot of sense, especially for someone who's, just starting out on this whole journey.
Totally. Okay, so that's the first big critique, the wrong order of operations.
Got it.
The second one has to do with how the book uses examples.
Examples.
Yeah, especially when it comes to real estate.
Ah, real estate. The classic rich dad, poor dad example.
I know, right? So the book, it uses real estate as an example of an asset.
Which it can be.
Absolutely. But the video essayist argues that the book doesn't really make it clear that real estate isn't the only way, or even always the best way, to build wealth.
That's a really good point. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Right. So some readers, they might get so fixated on that real estate example that they miss the bigger picture about diversifying, you know?
Yeah, and about really understanding how different investment strategies work.
Exactly. And blindly following any single strategy, especially without, considering what's happening in the market.
Could be a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. So we've got these two critiques so far. Rushing into investing and misinterpreting the examples in the book. But what about the actual nuts and bolts of building a business?
Right, like the practical side of things. Does the video essay touch on that?
It does, and that's where things get even more interesting. Because the video essay argues that a lot of these self-help books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad included, they don't always do a great job of explaining those practical steps. The steps for actually starting and running a successful business.
Ah, so it's one thing to talk about being an entrepreneur, but it's another thing entirely to actually do it.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of readers, they hit a wall. They get the concepts, but they lack that, that specific know-how.
Okay, I see the problem. So what's the solution? If reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad isn't enough, what does this video essay suggest as a more effective way to learn and achieve financial success?
Well, video essayists, they advocate for a much more proactive and engaged approach to learning.
Proactive and engaged.
Yeah. It's not just about passively absorbing information. You have to actually go out there and apply it.
Okay, I like that. Tell me more about this proactive approach. What does that look like in practice?
So the video essayist, they lay out this kind of four-step process.
A four-step process, all right.
So step one is you identify successful people in your field, whatever field you're interested in.
Okay, so find your role models. Got it. What's step two?
Step two is you research their methods. How do they achieve success? And you look for common traits they share.
Interesting. So you're not just like copying them blindly, you're studying their approach, figuring out what works.
Exactly. And then step three is based on all that research, you develop a hypothesis about your own path, how you can achieve similar success.
So it's about tailoring those lessons to your own unique situation.
Exactly. And then finally, step four is you use books and other resources to address specific knowledge gaps as you encounter them along the way.
So it's like instead of just reading a book cover to cover, you're actively seeking out the information you need when you need it.
Exactly. It's about being much more targeted and intentional with your learning. And the video essay even gives a real-world example of this approach in action.
Oh, a real-life case study. I'd love to hear about that. Tell me more.
Let's dive into that after a quick break. We'll be right back to explore how this proactive learning strategy played out in a real-life scenario. So before the break, we were really getting into this idea of being more proactive with your learning when it comes to personal finance.
Yeah.
Not just passively reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad and hoping for the best.
Right. The video essayist really emphasizes that just absorbing information, it's not enough. You have to actually be out there in the world using that knowledge,
Trying things out, making mistakes, learning as you go.
Exactly.
But there's another point the video essay brings up that I thought was really interesting, and it has to do with critical thinking.
Critical thinking, how does that fit into personal finance?
Yeah, it's not like a specific investment strategy or anything.
Right.
But the video essayist argues that critical thinking is so important if you want to avoid just blindly following financial advice.
So even if it comes from, a well-known source like Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Exactly. Because even experts can be wrong sometimes. Or their advice might not apply to your specific situation.
So it's about taking a step back and asking yourself, does this actually make sense for me?
Yeah, and does it align with my goals, my circumstances? Really evaluating the advice instead of just taking it at face value.
Don't just drink the Kool-Aid, basically, especially when it comes to your money.
Exactly. And Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it puts a lot of emphasis on those concepts of assets and liabilities, right?
Right. Building assets, reducing liabilities, that's the core message.
Yeah. But the video essay seems to suggest that even those concepts can be oversimplified.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, take a house, for instance. It's often presented as this, classic asset. But what if you overextend yourself to buy that house? Or what if the housing market takes a downturn?
Suddenly that asset is a major liability.
Exactly. So it's not as straightforward as it might seem at first glance.
Right, context matters. What might be a great asset for one person could be a huge burden for someone else.
It all depends on your situation, your goals, how you manage that asset.
So it's not just about memorizing definitions, it's about really understanding how those concepts play out in the real world.
And understanding the nuances of different financial instruments, different investment strategies.
Becoming financially literate, basically.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about critical thinking, not taking financial advice at face value, and the importance of, really understanding those core concepts like assets and liabilities. What other key takeaways from this video essay do you think are important for listeners to remember?
I think a big one is that there's no one-size-fits-all path to building wealth. Rich Dad, Poor Dad has good points, don't get me wrong. But it's so important to read it critically, to adapt those principles to your own life, and to be open to other perspectives and approaches.
Totally. And like we talked about earlier, real success, whether it's financial or anything else, it's not just about reading books.
Right. It's about taking action, being proactive, constantly learning and growing.
And don't underestimate the power of research and networking either.
Oh, yeah. Learning from people who've already achieved what you're aiming for, that can be invaluable.
Absolutely. It's like having a mentor, a guide. And I think it's also important to remember the importance of mindset. Believing in yourself, believing you can achieve your goals.
Yeah, that's huge. Because you're going to hit obstacles. Everyone does. And having that positive mindset, it helps you push through those tough times.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, it's clear that this video essay really challenges us to think differently about personal finance, about learning, about what success even means.
Yeah, it's been a real eye-opener for me.
Me too. And now, a question for you, the listener. How can you apply what we've discussed today to your own financial journey? What steps can you take to become more proactive, more of a critical thinker, and ultimately, more in control of your finances? It's something to really think about.
It is.
This video essay's take on Rich Dad, Poor Dad has really given us a lot to think about.
It has. We've explored some really interesting ideas.
Yeah. From, not taking financial advice too literally, to thinking critically, to that proactive learning approach.
Right, and always remembering that your financial strategies, they need to fit your own unique situation.
And of course, we can't forget AI, our YouTube entrepreneur. Remember how she used that proactive approach to really boost her channel's growth?
Yeah, her story was a great example of how effective that can be. This whole discussion has really made me rethink some things about personal finance,
I feel the same way. I think that's what makes this deep dive so valuable. It's not just about telling you what to do or what to think.
It's about something bigger, for sure.
It's about giving you the tools and the mindset to be in control of your finances.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of your financial future.
Now, it's important to remember that the video essayist, they're not saying Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a bad book.
No, not at all. They actually acknowledge that it can be a valuable resource.
Right. It gets people thinking about financial literacy, about challenging traditional ideas about money.
Absolutely. But like any tool, you have to use it wisely.
And, with a healthy dose of that critical thinking we keep talking about.
Right. Think for yourself, basically.
Exactly. So it's not about rejecting everything in the book. It's about taking the good, leaving the bad, and finding what works for you.
And that's where you come in, dear listener. The video essay doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
It's not some magic formula for instant riches.
It's about empowering you to be an active participant in your financial journey.
To become a lifelong learner. To always be on the lookout for new knowledge and strategies.
Because think about it, some of the most successful people out there, they're constantly learning and adapting.
Trying new things, Not afraid to fail and then learn from those mistakes.
Exactly. And that learning, it can come from so many places. Books, mentors, your network, your own experiences.
It's all part of the journey.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final question. What are you going to do differently tomorrow?
To get closer to your financial goals. To live a richer, more fulfilling life.
Will you keep passively consuming information? Or will you take action, experiment, and forge your own path?
The choice is yours.
Yeah.
This has been The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deeper.